Hi everyone, I'm going to explain to you how to use the acrylic paints in with the SM uh, heat set agent that we have just released from McPherson Arts and Crafts. There are some basics of this that you need to know. For instance, your ratios. I'm going to be using the golden paint. We have Reborn FX is going to be coming out with their own pigment line, but we haven't got them ready yet. So for this demo, I'm going to show you with the golden paint because it's a fine artist paint, and it has lots of pigments in them. I know Liquitex also has lots of pigments, and I'm sure that it will work the same way too. I don't recommend using the craft paints because the craft paints have a lot of filler in them, very little pigments, meaning that there's only so much water-based medium that you can put in with this agent before the agent just can't bind with the water solubles. So there is a percentage of water you can only add based agents that you can. But when you're using it, just because I'm using water-based, don't think that you can add water to this stuff. So if you need to thin it down, you will be using a solvent with it. This is just to explain why these pigments work better versus the craft pigments. What will happen with a craft pigment is it will bind with it, but you're going to get very, very transparent colors coming through to the point that you probably can't hardly see the color. So it probably won't work for you, but feel free to experiment with it. As I said, I haven't really done a lot of experimenting with other craft paints. But who knows? It's fairly new on the market, so we look forward to other people seeing what it does or doesn't work with. So anyways, I'm going to show you, I usually start with a 1:15 ratio. So this golden paint, I'm going to put 1 drop in the middle there. And then I'm going to take the agent, which you always take it and shake it because it is an oil base. And there is an oil slick that does come to the top, so make sure that oil is in there. It's part of the heat activation stuff. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, now these ratios are only estimates at this point in time. You can probably find later on that maybe there's another color that you only have to do you can just do a 1:30 or even, even less than that. But I'm going to show you what to look for when you're testing these paints. So I've got my solution in there. I'm going to take my 1 drop and mix it into my 15 drops of the agent, and you'll see how nice and buttery and smooth it is. It's a fairly thick consistency. So if you, again, I was mentioning, if you want to thin it down, you will be using a solvent. Do not add water to this. I'll just add 2 drops there. I think that'll probably. Once you add the solvent in there, you'll find that you'll have a bit of a reaction happening. The paint seems to puff up, but when you give it a good stir, it relaxes back down, so you won't have any puffiness there when you're painting. It's nice and smooth, like nice oily butter, I guess, sort of. And then, of course, you just put it on to, I did these demos earlier, and pounce, and you'll see that there's no pigment dots. If you end up with pigment dots on it, that means that you've got a reaction with the paint that you're using. But I found, as I said, it's very nice and smooth to put on. I'm going to heat set this later just to make sure there's no reactions with that. Okay, so that basically tells you a little bit how to correctly test your paints. The next one I'm going to show you is if I take this and I'm going to do, let's say I'm going to do a 50-50 here. So it's about basically half and half. So I'm just going to do a puddle there, and then beside it I'm going to do a puddle about the same size. It's maybe a little bit bigger, so I'll add a little bit more paint just to show you that what happens when you put more pigment in it. And basically what is going to happen on a technical basis here is there's not enough agent in here to bind with that much water soluble chemicals or a chemical reaction in there. But you can see it's very dark because I only put a 50-50, but it is actually gone sticky, and there is a little bit of a segregation going on. If I leave it sit, I can see that it's kind of pooling. So that's telling me that this isn't binding in enough with the water content of that paint at a 50-50 level. Put this on here because I want to show you also what kind of reaction you may be looking for if you don't have the agent binding with that water base. As I said, it is a lot darker because we haven't thinned it down. Can we put solvent in it? Sure. I'll do another one with some solvent. But you'll also see as I'm patting it, the acrylic that's in there, the water base, is starting to dry faster than what the rest of it is because the agent hasn't bound with those water molecules in there. So it is allowing the paint to dry too fast, and I'm getting some splotchiness happening here. So that's the other thing that will happen is if you don't have enough agent in there, you'll get blotchy happening and the paint is drying in the air basically. Okay, let's just add a little bit of solvent to that because there'll be some people saying, well, what happens if you put solvent in there? This will really become a little bit, you got to really stir it because it becomes kind of like jello. You see a reaction happening there anyways. Okay, so the solvent is on there, making it a little bit buttery. I should use a new one here because we want to do a heat test on this. Okay, so the solvent's there. It's not picking up as bad as what it was over there, but there is little blotches I can see that are lifting because it's still too much water content in there. I wondered if the solvent would kind of break it down, but it doesn't. It seems to be doing okay. But again, we're going to take this and we're going to go heat set it, and we'll come back and then we'll do our tests and show you what happens when there's too much of a water base in there. Okay, so while I'm waiting for the heat set of the other experiment I did with the heat setting agent, I wanted to just kind of play around with something I haven't done, so you're very first ones to see if this works or not. I wanted to see if I could take the pan pastel powders here and see if they worked in with the agent. So basically what I'm going to do is just scrape some of the powder into here. I'm not going to put ratios with this because I don't know. My idea is to see if it even works. I'll figure ratios out later, but this is just some powders in. Now I know the powders are solvent. Works with the powders just to dilute them down, because if I put the powders the way they are into a thick solution, I'm going to be fighting powder dots all over the place, as they say, trying to mix it in. So I know the solvent will we'll mix the powders down to a nice smooth, no pigment dots will be happening there, you see. Probably didn't have to put that much solvent in there, but I see no pigment dots there. So this should work with putting in some of the heat set agent. And I don't know, I'm guessing maybe 50-50 on there. I can't see why it wouldn't work because all we're doing is adding a powdered dry pigment. There's no water content here. The solvent is compatible with the agent at any ratio. Okay, so I'm just going to put it on here and see if oh, it's, wow, nice color. Yeah, sometimes surprise myself. Okay, let's take it. Let's see if I get any resist happening. No, it's going on nice and smooth. Heat set paint. No, it's gone on quite nicely. So that's a nice pleasant surprise there, because there's no water in there, and it does dissolve in solvent quite readily. The other thing I wanted to try out just for the fun of it was the golden acrylics. I use the ones that are in the bottle, but these have got more like a gel-like filler in them than a watery filler, and I'm not sure if the gel will be compatible, but I wanted to find out. I'm curious, so I'm going to use that. I'm trying to think if I should put some solvent and see if I should make. No, let's just do this and see. I'm just going to do half and half. Now half and half doesn't make make sense, because I know that half and half usually ends up that there's too much water base in there. So I'm going to go to maybe a 1 to 3 ratio, this being twice as much as that dot. You can kind of judge it there yourself. I just wanted to get some more in there. I'm more curious to see if it mixes. Huh. It is, well, it's jelly, so it's going to have a few lumps until you stir it all in. But it doesn't look too bad, guys. It looks like it's got a lot of pigment in it, that's for sure. I sure want that much pigment on my doll, but let's maybe do 2 tests over here. I'm going to put a little bit over here and put some more. I just want to get it down to a transparency, but I'll take this one that I did and we'll just put it across there. Paper towel here, and don't want that much. And I'll put a little bit more in here, and at the same time I'll also make sure it's solvent. It's okay with some solvent in there. And do a mix. That's looking better for more transparent paint, but yeah, those 2 paints got a lot of pigment in them. That's more transparent. That's what I would more use on painting a doll. Just a nice little hue of green. Okay, so I'm going to throw that into the oven and we'll come back and see what happens with this one as well. Okay, we're back here again. And I have heat set both the little sample testing pieces that we were doing here. I just wanted to show you while we were heat setting for the 9 minutes at 265 Fahrenheit. This stuff has kind of settled. We're working with the acrylics again, remember that. And I just wanted to show you that this one in the middle here, we had, if you remembered, we put some solvent in there. And the solvent has evaporated off as we were leaving it out to dry, and it is gone kind of like sticky honey, I guess. But it is, if you just put more solvent into it, you should be fine. And just give it a stir. There we go. So it's all back to being buttery. It's a matter of just mixing again. This can be exposed to the air for maybe an hour before you'll get any reaction happening. The reaction you'll have is obviously eventually the acrylic water will come to the top and will start to air dry on you. So it is not a good medium to be mixing a lot up and putting it in a big jar. However, I have in the past put them into some little jars and made sure there was hardly any air pockets in there, and they seem to survive a couple of weeks with no problem. This one here, I think it was the pigment that just segregated on me. I'm going to dip into that as soon as I clean off my brush here. And I'll show you that it's just a segregation, it's not a drying. When it dries, it'll look like little chunks of paint, basically. It won't stir in at all. So I'm kind of stirring it there, and you'll see how that segregate. It was just a pigment segregation that was happening. And there you can see how smooth it is. There's no dried. Although I did get a little dry chunk there, and I'm not sure if it was off the edge of the... But you do have to watch that it doesn't dry out. But I have found that you can mix a little bit at a time, but not for a long-term storage basis. So I'm just going to leave that there, and I'll put the lids on later on. So on to what we were doing before. Clean that off. Oh, by the way, but the one thing we did not mention with any of this is after you're all done, how in the heck do I clean my brushes out? So you either have to use a solvent, or if you don't like using solvents, I do know the isopropyl alcohol here at 99%. It will work as a brush cleaner as well. And you just put a little bit into a dish here, and it comes out. You'll see the pigments in that come out quite quickly. and you can wash it off. Yes, you do need to wash out these brushes after you're done with this, because remember, we're using a water-based acrylic. So if you don't wash them out, what's going to happen is you're going to get little dried pink pigments of acrylic happening in your brush, and it'll come off as little dry specks. So do your solvent and then give your brushes a wash in just some soap. And I use the ivory soap here, so you can use your soap of your liking. So I'm just going to push this over here. This is what we were doing before. This is the ratio of the 1 to 15. I'm going to put some solvent into this little cavity here. I'm going to put my little tester here. We're going to go across, and nothing should be happening. There's nothing there, basically. I'm expecting something to happen over on this one, because it was the one, like the 50-50 ratio. I'm expecting I'm going to have probably the solvent picking up some of that red in there. Not a lot, but there is some, okay? And that's what I expected. I expected that to happen because the acrylics have come to the top, and there's not enough of that heat curing system covering the water soluble, that it is basically coming loose and releasing the pigments, because there wasn't enough binder in it. Okay, so that's what happened with that one. Over here, I'm expecting the same. I'll just use the other side of that Q-tip. It was just we added some solvent to it, but it was still that 50-50 mixture. And again, remember what I was having problems with, even putting it on, I was getting some patchiness happening because I had the acrylic drying too fast. Okay, you see, and there is some pigments coming off. So that's why you need to kind of keep it down to a 115. You can try a 1 to 12, 1 to 10, you know, but keep it mostly that it has to have most of this agent in there. And again, it's a matter of testing out your air dry paints to see what happens with them, because every air dry paint has a different binder system, filler system, pigment system. So they're not all the same. So that's why I can't answer all the questions about does this work, does this work. You're going to have to give it a try and maybe advocate it out there once you test those yourself. Now over here, we were just doing some little fun stuff with some of the acrylics to see if the stuff in the gel worked. I'm not going to use that one. I'm expecting that it will come off. I also found, I don't know if you can see that, but if you see, if I do this, there's a pigment segregation happening, so I don't think the gel is a good idea. But maybe it'll work for somebody else, I'm not sure, but I'm gonna, this was a 50-50 solution again. It's not coming off. I was expecting it to. It doesn't seem to be. But I do not like that pigment segregation that has happened there, so that bothers me a bit. Over here, we added some solvent and some more of the agent, so it was diluted down more. I'll even get into those little creases to see if anything will release. And I'm not seeing anything on that either happening. So even though the gel did cure, I still don't like that pigment dot happening in there. Over here was our powders. That's what I was really excited about. I didn't know that the powders would work. Okay, is that, yeah, that's a clean one. And we'll give it a rub and see. Hopefully it'll be a good sealer for powders too. I can't see why it wouldn't. Okay, there is a little bit of residue coming off there. So I would probably back off a bit on the pigment in the powders again and add a little bit more agent. That'll be something I'll play with, because I kind of like that idea of adding some powders in there. But it'd be great if it was a good sealant to put on top of the powders too. Many people are looking for something that'll work with that. So we'll do some more testing with the powders and see what happens. So that was right off the top of my head to test those two for today, and hopefully this will give you a little bit of information and knowledge on how to go about seeing if the agent will work with the acrylic system with the paints that you're working with. Thank you.